My wife, 31F, is cheating with her stepfather, and I don't know how to process it, 32M. I never thought I'd be posting here, but my life feels like it's unraveling, and I need some outside perspective. I'm writing this because I genuinely don't know what else to do. Buckle up, because this story is going to sound like the script of some trashy reality TV show, but unfortunately it's my life. My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 7 years. We've had a pretty solid relationship, or so I thought. Sure, we've had our disagreements, but nothing out of the ordinary. Emily is fiery, passionate, and opinionated, which is part of what drew me to her in the first place. She's also an incredible mother to our 2-year-old daughter, Sophie, and seeing them together has always been one of the highlights of my day. Lately, though, things have been off. It started a couple of months ago, with small, seemingly inconsequential changes. She became overly protective of her phone, which was unusual because we've never had issues with privacy before. Whenever I asked her about it, she'd roll her eyes and say something like, "I just need some personal space. Is that too much to ask?" That's when the late night started. Emily claimed she was helping her mom with family stuff, which seemed plausible. Her mom, Karen, had recently remarried, so I figured there might be some blending family drama to sort out. But then there was the perfume. Her favorite scent, one she usually only wore on special occasions, suddenly became her go-to. I confronted her about it once, jokingly, asking if she was dressing up for someone special. She laughed it off and said I was being ridiculous. "You're paranoid," she said, tossing her hair over her shoulder like she always does when she's trying to dismiss a topic. But here's the thing, I've always trusted Emily. She's never given me a reason not to. Until last week. It was a Friday night, and she had told me she'd be staying at her mom's place overnight to help with some planning for a big family party. Sophie and I had a quiet night at home, and I decided to clean up the house after she went to bed. While tidying up, I accidentally knocked over Emily's gym bag, which she'd left by the door. That's when I saw it, a tiny velvet box. My heart leapt into my throat. It was too small for anything practical, and I immediately thought, oh, maybe it's a surprise for me. An early Valentine's gift or something. I opened it, expecting to find a nice watch or a keychain. Instead, it was a men's ring. Not mine. My mind went blank. I sat there staring at it for what felt like hours, trying to piece together what the hell was happening. Why would Emily have a man's ring hidden in her gym bag? And who the hell was it for? I don't know why, but my gut told me it wasn't just a random gift. Something about it didn't feel right. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "Love you, babe. Hope Sophie isn't giving you too much trouble. See you tomorrow? Red heart." I stared at the screen, a knot tightening in my stomach. My wife, who was supposedly at her mother's house, was sending me sweet texts while carrying around a ring meant for someone else. That's when it hit me. I needed to find out the truth. The ring haunted me the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Emily's face, her laugh, her confident denials when I'd ask harmless questions about her sudden secrecy. That little velvet box sat on the counter, taunting me, daring me to dig deeper. By the time the sun came up, I'd decided to confront her. But then I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if this was some innocent misunderstanding, and I ended up accusing the woman I loved of something she didn't do? I needed more proof. Saturday morning rolled around, and Emily came home like clockwork. She walked through the door wearing her usual casual smile, kissed Sophie on the forehead, and asked if I'd had breakfast yet. It was so normal, like nothing had changed. She didn't even glance at the gym bag I'd put back exactly where I found it. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "How was your mom's?" "Oh, you know," she replied, brushing her hair out of her face. "Same old drama. I swear, blending families is harder than anyone realizes. But we got most of the party stuff figured out." I nodded, watching her closely. "Sounds exhausting. You must have been up late." Her eyes flicked toward me for a second, then back to Sophie. "Yeah, we were. Mom's still trying to make things perfect for Harold. Harold. Her stepfather. I've never had anything against the guy. He's one of those semi-retired, golf-playing types who always smells like expensive cologne and bourbon. He married Emily's mom about a year ago, and while he wasn't exactly my favorite person, he seemed harmless enough. A little too friendly sometimes, maybe, but that was just Harold being Harold, or so I thought. Did Harold help with the planning, or was it just you and your mom? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She froze for the briefest moment, just a flicker of hesitation before she smiled and waved me off. Oh, he was around, but you know Harold. He doesn't do planning. He mostly just sat there sipping whiskey and cracking jokes. Mom practically had to drag him away from the TV to taste test the hors d'oeuvres. She said it so casually, so naturally, that for a second I almost believed her. But that flicker of hesitation? It planted a seed of doubt. Later that night, after Sophie was in bed, I decided to test the waters. Emily was in the shower, her phone sitting on the nightstand. I stared at it, the little voice in my head telling me not to invade her privacy battling against the gnawing suspicion that I couldn't ignore. I gave in. The first thing I noticed was that her text history with her mom was surprisingly sparse. For someone who just spent the night planning a party with her, there weren't many messages exchanged. But there were a few from Harold. The latest one sent the same night she was supposedly up late planning. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. Red heart. My heart dropped. I reread the message at least 10 times, hoping I was misinterpreting it. But no matter how I looked at it, there was no innocent explanation for why Emily's stepfather was sending her that kind of message. I felt sick. I locked the phone and put it back on the nightstand just as I heard the water shut off. A moment later, Emily walked into the bedroom, towel wrapped around her, humming to herself. She didn't notice my expression, or if she did, she didn't let on. I didn't sleep that night. Sunday morning felt surreal, like I was trapped in a dream I couldn't wake up from. Emily was in the kitchen, humming while she made pancakes for Sophie, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I sat at the table, staring at her like I didn't know who she was anymore. Her phone was on the counter, just a few feet away. I couldn't stop picturing that text from Harold. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. Red heart. What the hell did it mean? Was it exactly what it looked like? Or was my brain twisting something innocent into something terrible? Want more coffee? Emily asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. Huh! She gave me a weird look, holding up the coffee pot. Do you want more coffee? You've been zoned out all morning. Yeah, I muttered, sliding my mug toward her. Didn't sleep well. She frowned. Everything okay? Is everything okay? You tell me, Emily. I swallowed the urge to confront her right then and there. Just stressed about work. I lied. She seemed satisfied with that answer, and went back to pouring Sophie's juice. I decided I couldn't wait much longer to figure this out. So that afternoon, while Emily took Sophie to the park, I started digging. The first thing I did was search through her gym bag again. The velvet box was gone, but there were other clues: her favorite perfume, the one she'd been wearing more and more lately, along with a few stray receipts crumpled at the bottom of the bag. Most of them were from local cafes and restaurants, but one caught my attention: a charge for a hotel just outside of town. My blood ran cold. I checked the date. It was from last weekend, the same night she told me she was at her mom's helping with party planning. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and dread. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I still didn't want to believe it. There had to be another explanation. Right. But then I noticed something else. In the pocket of her jacket hanging by the door, I found a second phone. It wasn't hers. At least, not the one I knew about. My hands shook as I powered it on. It was locked, of course, but I could see notifications on the home screen. One of them was from Harold. Miss you already? Red heart. I slammed the phone down on the counter, my heart racing. I wanted to scream, punch a wall, do something, anything, to release the pressure building inside me. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. Something was going on, and it was far worse than I'd imagined. When Emily got home later that evening, I tried to act normal, but I could barely look at her. She kissed me on the cheek, and it took everything I had not to flinch. "Everything okay?" she asked again, her tone laced with concern. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Just tired." She didn't push it, but I could see the suspicion in her eyes. I knew I couldn't keep this charade up for long. I needed to know the truth, and fast. That night, after Emily went to bed, I stayed up staring at the second phone. My mind was racing, playing out every worst-case scenario. Was it really what it looked like? Was she actually cheating, and with Harold of all people? I unlocked my laptop and started researching how to get into a locked phone without a passcode. I'd never done anything like this before, but desperation makes you resourceful. After an hour of searching, I found a software tool that claimed it could bypass the lock screen. I worked on it for hours, the quiet of the house making every small sound feel deafening. Finally, the program worked. The phone unlocked, and I felt my stomach twist as I scrolled through it. The first thing I saw was a string of messages from Harold. "Can't stop thinking about last night. Don't forget the ring tomorrow. Your mom doesn't suspect anything, does she?" My hands trembled so badly I had to set the phone down for a moment. I stared at the screen, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. The messages were clear. There was no way to misinterpret them. But the ring? What ring? The one I'd found in her gym bag? I scrolled further back in the message thread, each new text confirming my worst fears. The late-night meetups, the hotel stays, the talk about keeping things secret from her mom. It was all there, in black and white. But the texts weren't the worst part. Buried in the phone were photos. Selfies of Emily and Harold, smiling like a couple of teenagers. Some were innocent enough, sitting in a car, walking along a trail, but others were intimate. Her hand on his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist. In one, they were sitting on a hotel bed, Harold shirtless, Emily in a robe. I wanted to vomit. How could she do this? How could she betray me, betray her mom, with someone who was supposed to be part of our family? The rage inside me was boiling over, but I forced myself to keep digging. I needed everything, all the proof I could get before I confronted her. I took screenshots of the messages and photos, saving them to a folder on my laptop. Then, just as I was about to close the phone, I noticed something else, a calendar event scheduled for the next day. Lunch with H. I stared at the screen, the knot in my stomach tightening. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The next morning, I decided to follow her. Emily kissed me goodbye like nothing was wrong, saying she was heading to a nearby coffee shop to work on some freelance projects. She even brought Sophie along, dropping her off at daycare on the way. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her car. She didn't go to a coffee shop. She went to a small, out-of-the-way diner just outside of town. I parked a few spaces away and watched as she walked inside. Moments later, Harold pulled up in his fancy black SUV, stepping out with the confidence of someone who didn't have a care in the world. They hugged in the parking lot. Hugged. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like they weren't sneaking around behind everyone's backs. I felt the blood drain from my face as I watched them walk inside together, laughing and smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to storm in and confront them right then and there. But I held back. I needed to keep my cool. I needed to be smart. I snapped a few photos of their car plates and texted my brother, Mike, who works as a private investigator. "I need your help," I wrote. "It's about Emily." I sat in my car outside the diner, watching Emily and Harold through the large front window. They were seated in a booth near the back, leaning in close and talking like nothing else in the world mattered. Harold reached across the table, brushing his hand against hers, and Emily didn't pull away. It felt like my chest was going to cave in. Seeing it unfold in front of me, in real time, was somehow worse than finding the texts and photos. This wasn't just a fling, it was a relationship. Mike called me back within minutes of my text. "What's going on?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Emily's cheating," I said flatly. "With Harold. Her stepfather." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You've got to be kidding me," Mike finally said, his voice sharp. "Her stepfather? That's wow. Okay, do you have proof?" "Yes," I said. "Texts, photos, everything. And right now, they're inside this diner, acting like it's date night. Where are you? I'll come meet you." I gave him the address, and within 20 minutes, Mike's car pulled into the parking lot. He got out, wearing his usual no-nonsense expression, and slid into the passenger seat of my car. "This is bad," he said, glancing toward the diner window. "You were right to call me. You can't just go in there guns blazing, you need to be strategic about this. Especially if you're thinking about divorce." "I'm not there yet," I muttered, though even saying the word, divorce, made my stomach churn. "But I need to know everything. I need to know how long this has been going on, what they've been doing, everything." Mike nodded. "Okay. Let me handle it." We sat in silence for a while, watching as Emily and Harold finished their meal. They seemed so casual, like they'd done this 100 times before. Harold even paid the bill, real chivalrous of him, considering he's married to her mother. They left the diner together, Harold's hand lightly touching the small of her back. My fist clenched involuntarily, but Mike put a hand on my shoulder. "Keep your cool," he said. "You're going to thank yourself later." I watched as they got into Harold's SUV and drove off. Mike took a picture of the license plate and jotted something down in his notebook. "I'll tell them," he said. "You go home. Act normal. Don't give her any reason to suspect you're onto her." "Normal," I repeated, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. How the hell was I supposed to act normal when my wife was sneaking around with her stepfather? But I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. That evening, Emily came home like nothing had happened. She kissed Sophie on the forehead, asked me about my day, and even suggested we order pizza for dinner. The sheer audacity of her casualness made my blood boil, but I forced myself to smile and play along. "Sure," I said. "Pizza sounds great." As she scrolled through her phone, probably texting Harold, my own phone buzzed. It was Mike. They went to his house. "I'll dig deeper. Hang tight." I stared at the message, my stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't going to end well. The next few days felt like living in slow motion. Emily carried on as if nothing was wrong, smiling, laughing, and playing with Sophie like she wasn't hiding a double life. Meanwhile, I was walking around with this burning pit in my stomach, waiting for Mike's updates. It didn't take long. Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was at work. "Got more for you. We need to meet." I left work early, claiming I wasn't feeling well, and drove to a small coffee shop on the other side of town where Mike was waiting. He had a manila folder on the table in front of him, his face set in that grim way that told me I wasn't going to like what he'd found. "What is it?" I asked, sitting down. He slid the folder across the table. "Everything you need to know." I tailed them for the last couple of days and got more pictures, timestamps, the works. They're not being as careful as they think. I opened the folder, and my stomach turned. Photos of Harold and Emily at his house, her car parked in his driveway. One of them walking out together, his hand on the small of her back again. Another of them hugging in his front yard. And then the worst one, Harold leaning in to kiss her. I pushed the folder away, my jaw tightening. "This is unbelievable," I said through gritted teeth. "It gets worse," Mike said, lowering his voice. I did some digging on Harold. Turns out, he's got a history. "A history?" Mike nodded. Before he married Emily's mom, he was married twice before. Both ended in infidelity scandals, him cheating with women much younger than him. The guy's a predator, plain and simple. My hands curled into fists under the table. And now he's messing with my wife. This is sick. Mike leaned forward. You need to think carefully about your next move. You've got enough evidence here to blow it all up, but you've got Sophie to think about. Whatever you do, don't act out of anger. You need to be smart about this, or Harold will weasel his way out like he's done before. I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. What do you suggest? First, get a lawyer, he said. Don't tell Emily yet. Let me keep digging while you figure out your options. You want to come out of this with as much leverage as possible. I took the folder and tucked it under my arm, my mind racing. Thanks, Mike. I owe you. You don't owe me anything, he said. Just promise me you'll keep your head on straight. This guy doesn't deserve to win. That night, I lay in bed next to Emily, staring at the ceiling while she scrolled on her phone. The sight of her acting so nonchalant made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. Everything okay? She asked, glancing at me. Yeah, I lied. Just a lot on my mind. She smiled, leaning over to kiss my cheek. Don't stress too much, okay? You're an amazing husband and dad. I love you. Her words felt like a slap in the face. As she rolled over and drifted off to sleep, I stared at the back of her head, my mind racing. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of confronting her made my chest tighten. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Sophie, her mom, and everyone else Harold had hurt. I wasn't going to let this slide. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I'd never spoken to one before and felt out of my depth, but I knew I couldn't handle this alone. The attorney, a sharp and professional woman named Rachel, listened patiently as I explained the situation. I could hear her taking notes, occasionally pausing to ask a question. So you have proof of the affair? She asked. Yes, I said. Texts, photos, and witness accounts. My brother's a PI, and he's been helping me document everything. Good, Rachel said. Keep gathering evidence, but don't confront her yet. If you decide to pursue divorce, you'll want a rock-solid case. And if you're thinking about custody, you'll need to demonstrate that her actions aren't in Sophie's best interest. The word custody hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't even considered what this would mean for Sophie. Would I have to fight for her? Share her? The thought of splitting time with my daughter, or her being in the orbit of Harold, made my stomach turn. Is there anything else I should be doing? I asked. Yes, Rachel said firmly. Stay calm. Don't give her any reason to suspect you're onto her. The more composed you are, the better your position will be later. And remember, everything you do now will set the tone for what comes next. Got it, I said, though staying calm felt like the hardest thing in the world. That night, Emily was in the living room, scrolling through her laptop while Sophie played with her blocks on the rug. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time Emily's phone buzzed, my jaw tightened. Was it Harold? Were they planning their next meeting right in front of me? Hey, Emily said suddenly, glancing up from her laptop. I was thinking we should take a weekend trip soon. Maybe to the mountains? Just us three. The audacity of her suggestion made my blood boil. How could she talk about family trips while sneaking around with her stepfather? That sounds nice, I said, forcing a smile. She grinned, looking genuinely pleased. Great! I'll start looking into cabins tomorrow. As the evening went on, I felt like I was living in a bizarre alternate reality. Emily was acting like the perfect wife and mother, laughing with Sophie, snuggling up next to me on the couch. But every touch, every smile felt like a lie. When Sophie was asleep and Emily went to shower, I opened the folder Mike had given me and stared at the photos again. My heart pounded as I studied the image of Harold kissing her, my fingers gripping the edges of the paper so hard they crinkled. I wanted to throw the folder across the room, but instead, I carefully tucked it back into its hiding place. I wasn't ready to use it yet, not until I had everything I needed to end this once and for all. The next day, Mike called with an update. You're not going to believe this, he said. What? Harold's been siphoning money out of a joint account he shares with Emily's mom. I found evidence that he's been moving it into a private account under his name. My stomach dropped. Are you serious? Dead serious, Mike said. This guy's not just messing around, he's setting himself up to walk away with a fortune while Emily's mom is left in the dust. The revelation made me feel sick all over again. Harold wasn't just a sleazy predator, he was a thief. And Emily, whether she realized it or not, was complicit in his schemes. We need to tell her mom, I said, my voice shaking. Not yet, Mike cautioned. We need to nail this guy first. Once we have everything, we can go to her and lay it all out. But right now, we have to be careful. I nodded, gripping the phone tightly. Okay. Keep digging. That night, I sat in the darkened living room long after Emily had gone to bed. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. Harold wasn't just destroying my marriage, he was tearing apart an entire family. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The next morning, I woke up determined. Harold wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed, not after what he was doing to Emily's mom, to Sophie, to me. I'd already reached my limit, but now I was focused. I just had to play it smart, like Mike and Rachel both said. Emily had plans that day. She mentioned she'd be meeting with her mom to finalize more details for the party. I wanted to laugh at the irony, knowing she was probably sneaking off with Harold instead. But I kept my face neutral and kissed Sophie goodbye as I headed to work. Or at least, that's what I told her. Instead of going to the office, I met Mike downtown. He had another folder waiting for me, and from the grim expression on his face, I could tell it wasn't going to be good news. All right, what now? I asked, sliding into the booth across from him. Harold's been busy, Mike said, handing over the folder. I flipped it open and immediately felt my stomach churn. Inside were bank statements showing large withdrawals from Emily's mom's account, along with transfers to an offshore account I'd never seen before. Mike had also included photos of Harold at the bank, smiling like he didn't have a care in the world as he handled the transactions. This guy is setting himself up for a clean getaway, Mike said. He's pulling money out in chunks, trying to avoid raising any red flags. But he's not as slick as he thinks. I clenched my fists. And Emily? Is she involved in this part of it? I don't know for sure, Mike admitted. But based on the texts and photos you've shown me, she's at least complicit. Whether she realizes the full extent of what he's doing is another question. The thought of Emily being a willing accomplice made my chest tighten. Was she really that far gone? Or was Harold manipulating her the same way he was manipulating everyone else? Any advice? I asked, my voice low. Mike nodded. Yeah. You need to bring Rachel in on this. If Harold's siphoning funds and your wife is involved, this could complicate a potential divorce case. Rachel will know how to handle it. That evening, I waited until Emily was out of the house to call Rachel and fill her in on the latest developments. She listened patiently, asking pointed questions about the bank transfers and what role Emily might be playing. This changes things, Rachel said. If Harold's committing financial fraud, and Emily's even tangentially involved, this could impact custody. Judges don't look kindly on parents who are complicit in illegal activity, even indirectly. The mention of custody made my chest tighten again. I couldn't imagine a world where I didn't have Sophie with me full-time, but I also couldn't imagine dragging her through a bitter court battle. What should I do? I asked. For now, keep documenting everything, Rachel said. Let Mike do his job, and don't confront Emily until you're ready to act. We need to approach this strategically. That night, Emily came home acting like everything was fine, as usual. But when she kissed me hello, I couldn't help but pull back slightly. What's wrong? She asked, frowning. Nothing, I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired. She studied me for a moment, then shrugged and headed to the kitchen. I watched her go, my mind racing. The more I uncovered about Harold and Emily, the more I realized just how much I didn't know about the woman I'd married. Was this really who she was? Or had Harold somehow turned her into this stranger I barely recognized? One thing was clear: I needed to protect Sophie, no matter what. The next morning, Mike sent me another update. He's meeting with her again today. Same diner. Want me to keep tailing them? Yes, I replied. Don't let them out of your sight. I stared at my phone, a wave of dread washing over me. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was bigger, messier, and far more dangerous than I'd initially realized. And I was running out of time to stop it. Mike's update had me on edge all morning. While Emily played the part of a doting wife and mother, the reality of what was happening behind my back felt like a storm gathering on the horizon. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Mike to tell me where Harold and Emily would go next. Around lunchtime, his text finally came through. They're heading to his house again. No detours. Looks like they're comfortable there. I stared at the screen, anger and disgust churning in my stomach. The sheer brazenness of it all, their complete disregard for who they were hurting, was almost too much to process. Keep documenting everything, I replied. Already on it, he sent back. For the rest of the day, I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting to Harold's house, to what Emily was doing there, to how she could even look me in the eye when she came home. By the time I clocked out, I felt like a volcano ready to erupt. That evening, as I sat at the dinner table with Emily and Sophie, I couldn't stop imagining her at Harold's place just hours earlier. She was laughing at Sophie's jokes, cutting up her food, and acting like nothing was wrong. "Are you okay, babe?" Emily asked, breaking me out of my thoughts. I forced a smile. "Yeah. Long day." She gave me a sympathetic look, but there was something in her eyes that made me wonder if she suspected anything. Could she feel the tension radiating off me? Did she notice how tightly I gripped my fork, or how I barely looked at her while we ate? As soon as dinner was over, I retreated to the bedroom, claiming I needed to check some emails. I locked the door behind me, pulled out my phone, and called Mike. "Tell me you have something solid," I said as soon as he answered. "Oh, I've got something," he replied, his tone grim. "But you're not going to like it. Just tell me." There was a pause, then Mike sighed. "I followed them to Harold's house, like I said. They stayed inside for a while, and then they left together in Harold's car. I tailed them to a jewelry store." "A jewelry store?" I repeated, my heart sinking. "Yep. They went in together and came out about 30 minutes later. Harold was carrying a small bag. I didn't even have to ask what was in it." The velvet box I'd found in Emily's gym bag flashed through my mind. "Do you think they're buying wedding rings?" I asked, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "Could be," Mike said. "Or an anniversary gift, or something else entirely. Either way, it doesn't look good." My mind was spinning. Was Harold planning to leave Emily's mom? Were he and Emily plotting to run off together? The idea felt insane, but so did everything else about this nightmare. "Thanks, Mike," I said, my voice tight. "Keep me posted." That night, as Emily lay sleeping beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Harold and Emily were clearly planning something, and whatever it wasn't good. I thought about the photos, the texts, the bank transfers, all the evidence piling up against them. But it still didn't feel like enough. I needed to know exactly what they were planning before I confronted Emily, before I exposed Harold to her mom. I wasn't going to let them blindside me, or anyone else in this family. The next day, Mike sent another text. "They're meeting again tonight. Harold's place. Want me to keep tailing them?" "Yes," I replied. My patience was wearing thin, but I knew I had to stay calm. The truth would come out eventually, and when it did, I'd be ready. Mike's text haunted me for the rest of the day. Every hour that passed felt like an eternity. Knowing they were meeting again at Harold's house made me sick, but I also knew this was my chance to uncover whatever it was they were planning. Around 7 p.m., I got another update from Mike. "They're both inside. I've got eyes on the house. You want me to stay put or go closer?" "Stay put for now," I replied. "I don't want them seeing anything suspicious." I sat in my car a few blocks from Harold's house, my stomach churning. I'd decided to come along this time, though I stayed out of sight. If they made a move, I wanted to be there to witness it myself. An hour passed. Then 2. My phone buzzed again. "They're leaving," Mike wrote. "Same car, Harold driving. Heading west." I fired up my engine and followed at a safe distance. Mike had a head start on me, but I stayed close enough to pick up the trail if they changed direction. They pulled into a parking lot near the edge of town, where an upscale event venue was situated. Mike's car was already parked, and he waved me over when I arrived. "What are they doing here?" I whispered as we crouched behind his car. Mike handed me a pair of binoculars and pointed toward the venue entrance. "See for yourself." Through the lenses, I watched as Harold and Emily walked inside together, laughing and talking like a couple on a date. Emily wore a dress I hadn't seen before, something elegant and slightly flashy. Harold, as usual, looked smug and overly confident. "What is this place?" I asked, lowering the binoculars. "It's a wedding venue," Mike said. "They host engagement parties, rehearsal dinners, all that." My grip tightened on the binoculars. "You think they're planning?" Mike shrugged. "It's possible. Or they could just be here for inspiration. Either way, it's not good." We waited in silence, both of us watching as people trickled in and out of the venue. Harold and Emily were inside for over an hour. Finally, they emerged, their expressions a mix of excitement and satisfaction. Harold had a folder tucked under his arm. Emily carried a small bouquet of flowers, probably some kind of sample or gift from the staff. Mike snapped a few photos as they walked back to Harold's car. "What now?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. "Now we wait," Mike said. "We've got enough to start putting the pieces together, but we're not quite there yet. Give it a little more time." When I got home that night, Emily was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I stared at her for a long moment, wondering how she could keep up this charade. Did she think I was so blind, so oblivious, that I wouldn't notice? I knew I couldn't wait much longer to confront her. Every day that passed felt like another dagger in my back, but I also knew Mike and Rachel were right. I needed to be methodical. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Sophie. It was about Emily's mom. And it was about making sure Harold didn't get away with this. The next day, I got a call from Rachel. "We need to talk," she said. "I've been reviewing the evidence you sent over, and I think it's time to start preparing for confrontation. But you need to be ready for anything. If they're planning something big, you're going to have to act fast." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean, act fast?" I asked. "If Harold's siphoning money, he might be planning to disappear," Rachel explained. "And if Emily's tied to it, you don't want her taking Sophie with her." The thought made my blood run cold. I knew I had to act soon. The clock was ticking, and I couldn't let this spiral out of control. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Rachel worked with me to finalize everything: legal strategies, custody considerations, and how to handle the confrontation without losing my temper. Mike kept digging, gathering every last piece of evidence he could find. Every night, I came home to Emily acting like nothing was wrong. She'd smile, kiss Sophie goodnight, and sit next to me on the couch like we were the perfect family. And every night, it took everything I had not to explode. But Rachel's words kept replaying in my mind: "You need to be ready for anything." Finally, Mike called me with what he called the last nail in the coffin. "They're planning to leave," he said bluntly. My heart stopped. "What?" "I followed Harold to a storage facility this morning. He's got a unit there, and it's packed with boxes, suitcases, and what looked like expensive items, artwork, jewelry, maybe even cash. He loaded some of it into his car and drove straight to the bank. I'm guessing he's stashing it somewhere else now." I sat down, my knees weak. "And Emily?" "She's part of it," Mike said. "I caught her meeting him at the storage facility later in the afternoon. They were talking for a while, and then they both left in separate cars. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." Did you hear what they said? Not much, Mike admitted. But I caught a couple of words when they were near the entrance. Something about timing and tickets. Tickets? I repeated, dread pooling in my stomach. Mike hesitated. Could mean plane tickets. Could mean something else. Either way, you don't have much time. They're getting ready to bolt. That night, I could barely keep myself from confronting Emily. She sat across from me at the dinner table, smiling like nothing was wrong, while Sophie babbled happily about her day. I kept my answers short, afraid my voice would crack if I tried to speak too much. Are you feeling okay? Emily asked, tilting her head. You've been so quiet lately. I forced a smile. Just a lot on my mind. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her touch making my skin crawl. Well, let me know if you need to talk, okay? I'm here for you. The irony of her words nearly made me choke. The next day, Rachel called me again. It's time, she said. We need to confront her and Harold before they make their move. If Mike's right and they're planning to leave the country, or even just run off somewhere, you need to stop them now. What's the plan? I asked. Rachel laid it out for me step by step. I'd confront Emily first, presenting her with the evidence and giving her a chance to come clean. Then we'd take everything to her mom, exposing Harold for the lying, cheating thief he was. Be prepared for her to deny everything, Rachel warned. And don't let her manipulate you. She's going to say whatever she can to save herself. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I'm ready. Good, Rachel said. Let me know how it goes. And if things escalate, don't hesitate to call the authorities. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. The authorities. Was that really where this was headed? That evening, I waited until Sophie was asleep before sitting Emily down in the living room. She looked at me curiously, her smile fading when she saw my expression. What's going on? She asked. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking. We need to talk. Emily sat on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, holding a mug of tea. She had that slightly guarded look she always got when she thought I was about to bring up something serious. What's wrong? She asked, tilting her head like she was genuinely concerned. For a moment I couldn't speak. The words felt too heavy, too unreal. But then I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I'd trusted for years. The woman who had been lying to my face. I know, I said simply. She blinked, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. Know what? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. About Harold. About the two of you. About what you've been doing behind my back. Emily's reaction was immediate. Her face paled, and her grip on the mug tightened so much I thought it might shatter. What are you talking about? She said, her voice trembling just slightly. Don't play dumb, Emily, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I've seen the texts. The photos. I know about the jewelry store, the hotel, the storage unit. I know everything. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like she was struggling to find the right words. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound. You've been spying on me? She said, her voice rising. What the hell is wrong with you? What's wrong with me? I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. You're sleeping with your stepfather, Emily. You're helping him steal from your mom. And you have the audacity to act like I'm the problem? Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment she looked like she might deny it again. But then her expression hardened. You don't understand, she said, setting the mug down and crossing her arms. It's not what you think. Really? I said, leaning back and crossing my own arms. Because it looks a lot like you've been sneaking around with Harold and planning to leave with him. She flinched at my words but quickly recovered. Harold and I, it's complicated, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You don't know what I've been dealing with. Then explain it to me, I said, my voice cold. Because from where I'm standing, you've betrayed me, your mom, and Sophie. So go ahead, Emily. Tell me how I've got it all wrong. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an escape. Then, finally, she spoke. Harold and we've been close since he married my mom, she said carefully. At first, it was just talking. He understood me in a way no one else did. And then, it got physical. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing her say it out loud was a different kind of pain. And the money? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily looked away. That was Harold's idea, she said. He said he wanted to protect me, that if things ever went south with you or my mom, we'd need a safety net. A safety net? I repeated, my voice rising. You're stealing from your own mother, Emily. Do you even hear yourself? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. I didn't want to hurt anyone, she said, her voice breaking. I swear I didn't. You didn't want to hurt anyone? I interrupted, standing up and pacing the room. Emily, do you even realize what you've done? You've destroyed our marriage, betrayed your mom, and put Sophie's future at risk. And for what? For Harold? A man who's clearly been using you? She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I didn't know how to stop. For a moment I just stared at her, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make her feel every ounce of pain she'd caused. But another part of me, the part that still cared about Sophie, knew I had to stay calm. This ends now, I said finally, my voice firm. Whatever you and Harold are planning, it stops here. I'm going to your mom with everything, and I'm making sure Harold pays for what he's done. And as for us, I don't know if there's anything left to save. Emily looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please don't tell her, she begged. It'll destroy her. She deserves to know, I said coldly. And if you care about her at all, you'll help me make this right. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. The line had been crossed, and there was no coming back from it. Emily was still crying when I walked out of the living room. I didn't trust myself to stay there any longer. The mix of anger, hurt, and disgust was too overwhelming. I needed air. I stepped out onto the porch, the cold night air biting against my skin, and leaned against the railing. My mind raced with everything she just confessed, her affair with Harold, the stolen money, her excuses that all felt hollow and selfish. I heard the door creak open behind me and turned to see Emily standing there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Please don't tell my mom, she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head. She deserves to know the truth, Emily. Harold's been stealing from her, and you've been helping him. You think I'm just going to let that slide? She'll never forgive me, Emily said, her voice breaking. You don't understand what this will do to her. Harold's all she has right now. Her words sparked a bitter laugh from me. All she has? Emily, he's been robbing her blind while sleeping with her daughter. If anything, she'll be better off without him. Emily flinched, but I didn't stop. Do you even realize what you've done? I asked, my voice rising. You've destroyed everything. Our marriage, your relationship with your mom, even your own dignity. And for what? For Harold? A man who's used you like a pawn. Her tears started again, but this time, I didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. I'll talk to him, she said desperately. I'll tell him to stop. I'll make it right. It's too late for that, I said coldly. You don't get to make it right. Harold's going to answer for what he's done, and so are you. The next morning, I called Rachel to fill her in on what had happened. She listened without interrupting, her tone calm and professional as always. You did the right thing by staying calm, she said. Now it's time to act. Are you ready to go to her mom? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to give Emily a chance to fix this herself, but I knew she wouldn't. She'd had months, maybe longer, to come clean, and she hadn't. I'm ready, I said finally. Good, Rachel said. Bring everything, the texts, the photos, the bank records. The more concrete the evidence, the harder it'll be for Harold to deny it. That evening, I drove to Emily's mom's house. I didn't tell Emily where I was going. She'd begged me not to, of course, but I wasn't about to let her guilt me into silence. When Karen opened the door, she smiled warmly, though there was a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Hey! This is a nice surprise. Where's Emily and Sophie?" "They're at home," I said, stepping inside. "But I need to talk to you. It's important." Her smile faded. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. "It's about Harold. And Emily." Karen's face went pale as I laid out everything, carefully, methodically, and without holding back. I showed her the texts, the photos, the evidence of the stolen money. At first, she sat there in stunned silence, her hands trembling as she flipped through the papers. Then, finally, she looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. "I wish I wasn't," I said. Karen's tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. "I trusted him," she said, her voice muffled. "I let him into my life, into my family. How could he do this?" I didn't know how to answer that. She looked at me, her expression shifting from grief to determination. "We need to stop him," she said. "Whatever it takes." Karen sat across from me, the weight of everything I'd just told her etched into her face. I could see the hurt, the betrayal, and the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Harold wasn't just her husband, he was someone she trusted to rebuild her life with after years of being on her own. And Emily? Her own daughter? That betrayal cut even deeper. "What do we do?" she asked finally, her voice steady despite the tears streaking her cheeks. I slid the folder of evidence across the table to her. "This is everything we have: texts, photos, bank statements, and records from the storage unit. I've also got my lawyer, Rachel, ready to help however we need." Karen flipped through the documents again, her hands shaking. "He's been draining my accounts," she muttered, almost to herself. "I had no idea. How could I not see this?" "Harold's good at hiding things," I said. "And he's had Emily to help him. But now we can stop them." She looked up at me, her jaw tightening. "We're going to the police. Tonight." Later that evening, Karen and I sat in a small office at the local police station, going over everything with the detective. Karen told her story with a mix of heartbreak and resolve, while I filled in the gaps where I could. The detective, a no-nonsense woman named Officer Grant, listened carefully, occasionally nodding as she flipped through the folder. "This is solid," she said finally, setting the papers down. "We'll start an investigation immediately. If Harold's been moving stolen funds, we'll track the accounts and freeze them. And as for the personal side of this," she glanced at Karen, "I'm sorry you're going through this." Karen nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We'll need you to avoid tipping him off," Officer Grant continued. "Let him think everything's normal until we have enough to bring him in. The last thing we want is for him to run." Karen and I exchanged a look. Keeping quiet wouldn't be easy, especially knowing what we now did. But we both nodded. "Understood," Karen said. When I got home that night, Emily was waiting for me in the living room. Her face was puffy, her eyes red from crying. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I went to your mom's," I said bluntly. Her face crumpled. "You told her, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "She knows everything. About Harold, about the money, about you." Emily sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "She's going to hate me," she whispered. "She's hurt," I said, crossing my arms. "But right now, her focus is on stopping Harold. She deserves justice, Emily. And frankly, so do I." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "What about us?" she asked. "Can we fix this?" I shook my head, my heart heavy but resolute. "You broke this, Emily. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. My only priority now is Sophie, and making sure Harold doesn't hurt anyone else." Emily didn't respond. She just sat there, her shoulders shaking as she cried. The next morning, Karen called me. They froze the accounts, she said, her voice tinged with both relief and exhaustion. Harold won't be able to move another cent. That's good, I said. What's next? The detective said they're putting together the rest of the case, Karen replied. They've already got surveillance on him and Emily. They want to make sure they have everything before making an arrest. Good, I said, gripping the phone tightly. Let me know if you hear anything else. Karen hesitated. How's Emily? She's a mess, I admitted. She knows she's lost everything. Karen sighed. I don't even know how to feel about her right now. She's my daughter, but what she's done, I don't know if I can ever forgive her. Take your time, I said. You don't have to decide anything right now. By the end of the day, things were moving fast. Rachel called me to let me know the police had gathered enough evidence to formally charge Harold with embezzlement and fraud. They were planning to arrest him within the week. And Emily? She was spiraling. She barely spoke to me or Sophie, spending most of her time locked in the guest room. I could hear her crying sometimes, but I didn't go to her. I didn't have the energy to comfort her anymore. My focus was on Sophie, and on what came next. The arrest happened faster than I expected. It was a quiet Thursday morning. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with puffy eyes and unkempt hair. Sophie was in the living room, humming happily as she played with her toys. Everything felt deceptively normal. Then my phone buzzed. They're doing it now, Mike texted. I looked at Emily, unsure whether to say anything. Part of me wanted to warn her, let her know what was coming, but another part of me knew she needed to face the consequences of her choices. Minutes later, there was a loud knock at the door. Emily looked up, startled. Who could that be? She asked, standing to answer it. Before she reached the door, I stepped in front of her. Wait, I said, my voice steady. Her confusion turned to panic as the knock came again, louder this time. Emily Harper? A voice called from the other side. This is the police. We need to speak with you. Her face drained of color. Oh my God, she whispered. I stepped aside, letting the officers in. Behind them stood Karen, her expression a mix of sorrow and steely determination. Emily Harper, you're under arrest for aiding and abetting fraud, one of the officers said, taking out a pair of handcuffs. No, wait. Emily stammered, backing away. This is a mistake, I didn't mean to. Karen stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. You helped Harold steal from me, Emily. You lied to all of us. Emily's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, sobbing. Mom, please, she begged. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to stop him. Karen's expression didn't soften. You had a choice, she said coldly. And you chose him over your family. The officers gently but firmly pulled Emily to her feet and read her rights. I watched as they led her out of the house, her pleas fading as the door closed behind her. After the arrest, Karen and I sat at the kitchen table, the weight of everything settling over us. She's my daughter, Karen said quietly, staring at her hands. But I can't forgive her for what she's done. Not yet. I understand, I said. I don't know if I can either. Karen nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. But Harold's out of our lives now. That's something, isn't it? It is, I agreed. At least we stopped him before he could do more damage. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Harold was charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, with Emily's cooperation as part of his schemes adding to the case against him. She struck a deal with the authorities, agreeing to testify against Harold in exchange for a lighter sentence. For Karen, the betrayal cut the deepest. She sold the house she and Harold had shared, moved closer to her sister, and started rebuilding her life piece by piece. As for me, I filed for divorce. Rachel guided me through the process, ensuring I had primary custody of Sophie. Emily wasn't in a position to fight it. Her legal troubles, combined with the evidence I'd collected, left her with little leverage. Months later, I stood in the backyard, watching Sophie chase Bubbles across the lawn. Her laughter was a bright spot in the midst of everything. Karen sat beside me, sipping tea. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "It's hard, but Sophie keeps me grounded." Karen nodded. "She's lucky to have you." I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the fallout, and realized I'd learned something important. I couldn't control what others did, but I could control how I responded. "Thanks," I said, smiling faintly. Karen smiled back, then turned her gaze to Sophie. "We'll get through this," she said. And for the first time in months, I believed her. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined for my marriage, but it was an ending, and with it came the chance for a new beginning.